The courthouse basement was cold and dark, motes of dust suspended in still air. Clarence Raby, now a man nearing 70, ran his hand along a splintered wooden crate. His fingers stopped on a torn file folder, its label inked in a faded, spidery hand, *runaway incidents, 1850-1860. He opened it. Inside lay a sheaf of papers, brittle and yellowed. On top, a single sheet, the script clearer: Eli, son of Master Jemison, slave. Escaped. Never recovered. Beneath it, in a cramped footnote, he denied his own blood. Clarence's breath caught in his throat. It was the name his grandfather had whispered on his deathbed, Eli. A story, buried under dust and time, was about to surface. It was the story of a boy born in chains, who rebelled against the very blood in his veins, and vanished from the pages of history. We now turn to 19th century America, where it all began. The air in the cotton field had gone still, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. An 8-year-old boy, his ribs a road map beneath thin skin, stood hidden behind the broad trunk of an oak. His eyes were wide, his heart a drumbeat in his ears. Before him, Overseer Bergs, a rawhide whip coiled in his hand, stood over a young enslaved woman named Lucy. Lucy had told Master's son she was too sick to work. Now Bergs's voice held no rage, only a quiet, icy finality. "You know the price of insolence," Bergs said, and the whip whistled before it cracked across Lucy's back. The boy watched as Lucy's lips sealed shut, uttering no sound, but her eyes held a pain that screamed into the hollow air. With each lash, the boy's teeth ground together. He clenched his small fists so tight his nails bit half-moons into his palms. He made a vow, silent and fierce. He would never let this be. This boy was Eli. There had been no fanfare for Eli's birth. He had come on a hot July night, in a cramped cabin of the quarters where a single small window fought for air. His mother, Sarah, was a woman of 20, her hands already scarred by the balls of cotton. The midwife, Memmy, an old woman whose face was a landscape of wrinkles, held the newborn. "He has the Master's eyes," Memmy whispered, and Sarah closed her own. Master Alastair Jemison was a tall, gaunt man, with a permanent furrow of calculation between his brows. Upon learning of this new son, he gave only one instruction to his steward, Mr. Bergs: "Move the woman. My wife won't have it." So, 3 days after Eli drew his first breath, Sarah was sold downriver to a distant plantation. Eli was raised by Memmy, who loved him as her own, but every night, as she sang him to sleep, his eyes would fix on the cabin door, as if searching for a shadow that never came. By 6, Eli was sent to the fields. His task was to carry water, heavy buckets swaying from a yoke that bruised his narrow shoulders. In summer, the sun branded his back; in winter, the wind sliced through his linsey-woolsey shirt. Overseer Bergs was a constant silhouette, his eyes missing nothing. Bergs never shouted, he simply watched, and his silence was more terrible than any curse. One day, when Eli stumbled from exhaustion, Bergs walked over and, without a word, appended a full bucket over the boy's head. Then he walked away, as if tending to an inconsequential weed. This quiet cruelty took root in Eli's soul. Master Jemison would occasionally ride through the fields on his bay mare, king surveying his domain. He looked at the slaves, but he did not see them. His gaze held the same detached appraisal a carpenter might give his tools. Eli watched him, and saw in the shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, a ghost of his own reflection. Master Jemison never once looked back. Eli grew quiet. He moved through his days in a watchful hush, but his eyes were recording everything. He possessed a memory of terrifying clarity. Once, Master Jemison's legitimate son, Henry, 2 years Eli's junior, was reciting a lesson on the porch. Eli, hidden, listened: "We the people of the United States." The words seared themselves into his mind. At night, he would ask Memmy, "Who are the people?" Memmy would hush him, fear in her voice, but under his insistence, she would murmur, "Free people, child. Not us." Eli decided to learn to read. He would linger near the big house, where Henry's discarded newspapers were tossed. He would steal them, and by moonlight, trace the strange symbols. Many warned him, they cut the tongue out for reading. Or worse. But Eli persisted. He learned in silence, hoarding knowledge like a secret cache of weapons. When Eli was 10, he was given a sack for picking cotton. His fingers were bloody by the end of the first day, but he made no sound. His friend, Ben, a boy of 12, worked the same row. Ben always smiled, and talked of a place called North. One day, Ben told Overseer Bergs he was ill. Bergs called him a liar. Ben resisted, and Bergs dragged him to a toolshed and locked him inside. For 3 days, they gave him nothing. On the 4th, he was brought out and whipped in the yard. Eli watched the skin on Ben's back open like a terrible flower, but Ben did not cry out. After, Ben was sold at auction. As they led him away, his eyes found Eli's. They held a single, blazing message, "Run." After that, Eli's silence deepened into something harder. He lay awake at night, Ben's face his only companion. Mamie sensed the change in the boy she called her son. A resolve was hardening within him, like metal cooling in a mold. By 12, Eli began to plan. He had memorized maps from stolen gazetteers, learned to find the North Star. He knew the Ohio River meant liberty. But he needed a connection, a thread to the world beyond the fence. One afternoon, skirting the edge of the kitchen garden, he heard a sound, a soft, stifled weeping. It was Miss Mary, Master Jemison's daughter, 15 and pale as a lily. She was clutching a book. Eli took a reckless chance. "Miss Mary," he said, his voice low. "Why you crying?" She started, then showed him the book. It was Uncle Tom's Cabin. It says you are people. That this is all wrong." In halting words, Mary spoke of the Underground Railroad, a hidden chain of safe houses and brave souls. She pressed a small bundle into his hands, a piece of cornbread, a worn wool sock, and inside it, a tiny, tarnished compass. "You must go through the mountains," she whispered. "Follow the star." The moon was full, but the clouds were swollen, and the air tasted of lightning. Eli embraced Mamie, who held his face in her hands. "Your mama walking with you, child. Now go." He slipped into the woods, a shadow among shadows. He moved towards the looming darkness of the Appalachians. For 3 days he walked, resting only when his legs buckled. On the 4th, he heard the distant bay of hounds. He found a cave, its mouth hidden by ferns, and hid for 2 desperate days, venturing out only at dusk to sip from icy streams. Hunger was a sharp stone in his gut, but fear was a sharper prod. One night, by a creek, he stumbled upon a white man splitting wood. The man looked up, saw the fugitive's wild eyes, and raised a hand, not in threat, but in pause. He gestured Eli to follow. He led him to a small cabin, where his wife wordlessly gave Eli stew and a blanket. They were Quakers. They hid him for a week, then guided him to the next link in the invisible chain. Months later, a thin, hardened boy who now called himself Clarence Raby crossed into Pennsylvania. Raby was a fragment of his mother's forgotten lineage, a name Mamie had once breathed to him. He had shed Jemison. He had denied the blood of his father and claimed the obscured heritage of his mother. Clarence Raby closed the old file. He understood now. This Eli was his grandfather, the man who had escaped and forged a new life. The grandfather who had spoken little of the past, only of the mountains. Eli, Clarence Raby, had lived a life of quiet defiance. He became a teacher in a colored school, a secret conductor on the very railroad that saved him. He married a woman who had also known flight, and they built a life in the hills of West Virginia, their past a guarded, sacred pain. He never spoke of Master Jemison. He had defied that blood, chosen his own lineage, and in doing so, had erased the slaveholder's claim on his future. Clarence Raby stepped out of the courthouse and looked toward the ancient, rolling peaks of the Appalachians. Those same mountains had swallowed his grandfather, a boy fleeing toward an uncertain dawn. How many stories, he wondered, lay folded into these dusty archives? How many Ellis, Sarahs, and Bens had their voices smothered, their wills recorded only as entries in a ledger of lost property? Slavery sought to break not only bodies, but memory itself. It aimed to sever the past from the future, to make a people strangers to their own history. Yet, stories like Eli's refused to stay buried. They lived in the slant of light on a mountain pass, in the determined set of a descendant's jaw, in the silent vow of a child witnessing injustice. Eli's tale is more than one boy's flight. It is the story of a choice forged in the crucible of profound violation, the choice to deny a bloodline of oppression and claim a heritage of resilience. It is a testament to the quiet, unheralded courage that threaded its way through the darkest chapters of history, a single, stubborn note of hope in a long song of sorrow. In the end, Clarence Raby understood his own name not as an ending, but as a legacy of that defiance, a whisper carried on the mountain wind, saying, "I was here. I chose. I lived." Eli's plan crystallized. He would leave on the next full moon, when the light was both a guide and a gamble.